Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Activity Strong Link Senior webinar. My name is Megan McMahon, and I am the Director of Strategic Development here at Link Senior. For today's webinar, we are providing one free NAB, NCAP, NCCDP, NCTRC, and NZSRDT CEU credit. To be eligible for the CEU credits, you do need to remain on this webinar for the full hour. At the end of the event, I will provide the required post-webinar CEU survey evaluation link in the webinar room chat box, and we'll also send that to you by email this afternoon. Please be sure to check your spam folder. This CEU survey must be completed by midnight Eastern Time this Thursday. If you have any questions about the CEU process, you can email us at webinars@linksenior.com. Your CEU certificate will be issued by email before the end of the day on Friday, January 21st. I will now hand it over to Charles D. Vilmorin, CEO and co-founder of Link Senior. Charles?
Thank you, Megan. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's Activity Strong webinar about Montessori, the ultimate person-centered approach to leadership, development, staff engagement, and dementia care. And I'm so excited to have Dr. Cameron Camp and Gary Johnson, who are going to join us and deliver their awesome presentation in a few minutes. To welcome everybody, I just want to remind all of you that Activity Strong is this platform that Link Senior developed and is developed in the wake of the pandemic to acknowledge, empower, and educate activity and life enrichment professionals. And we do this in partnership with Activity Connection, NAP, and NCAP. So, as Megan mentioned, my name is Charles Vilmorin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Link Senior, and this is my short bio, but essentially, we believe that all people are cool and that our industry, the senior living industry, is quote-unquote activity strong. And these are two initiatives that we started, All People Are Cool, about 7 years ago for a number of reasons. One of them is that we're not a big fan of this segregation based on age. We think that everybody is cool, including older adults. And we think they're really interesting and fun conversations to have. And obviously activity strong, like I mentioned, in the wake of this pandemic as a way to acknowledge all of you activity and life enrichment professionals. Very quick word of background on who we are. So this company that I co-founded called Link Senior is an evidence-based resident engagement platform for senior living. So we work with amazing organizations that the common denominator is that they value their team members, their care partners, and their residents. And they span throughout the different levels of care, including independent living, assisted living, memory care, and nursing homes. And essentially what we help you do is elevate engagement, augment your team members, and drive clinical quality of life and financial outcomes, which was actually showcased in a clinical study that was published in 2019. So in terms of agenda, I'm going to do like a quick word of introduction and pass it on very quickly to Cameron and Gary. But I just want to share with you that I've always been impressed by Dr. Camp's work, right? This concept of the cross-section between Montessori and the field of dementia care. So I've been thinking a lot about how do I introduce today's presentation. And I toyed with different ideas, and I thought that one of them would be cool, would be to kind of give a reference to Dr. Seuss' famous quote that says, "A person is a person no matter how small," right? Some of you, and I guess most of us, know this quote. We've experienced that ourselves when we were younger and if we have kids. But I thought it was interesting to change our word here and just say old, right? And there are a number of reasons. I probably can talk about it most of the afternoon, but we don't want me to do that right now. So I thought about just 3 ideas here, is that, you know, most of us are exposed to the concept of Montessori first, at least, through the younger generation. But I think, and I'm sure that today's presentation will address that, Montessori principle is good and actually are for all of us. And I think that's something really important to refer to. The second aspect is that today's presentation from Cameron and Gary are going to be talking about person-centered care, right? And obviously these words, this concept, starts with the person, which was so important to Dr. Seuss and obviously important for our presenters today. And then the last thing I'll say is, in this idea of respecting a person as a person no matter the age, I think there's this idea of how do we collaborate. And I'll refer back, and I'm sure it will be shared again today, that Maria Montessori's famous words is, whatever you do for me, you take away from me. And I sometimes think about that everything you take away from me are these little crumbs that ultimately will take my person away, right? And actually, Cameron, I don't know if you remember, but last summer when you and I had coffee together, you made it an allusion to that, and I really love the concept. So it's with kind of deep appreciation, thankfulness for both of you for joining, but also excitement for today's presentation, that I'm excited to introduce you all to Dr. Cameron Kapp, who's the Director of Research and Development for the Center for Applied Research in Dementia, and Gary Johnson, who's the Leadership Development Consultant for Monarch Pathways. I'll stop sharing my screen, and Gary, I'll let you share yours. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. Excited for today's presentation.
Great. Thanks, Charles. That's awesome. Let me see if I can get these boxes out of my way here. Yeah, so thank you very much. And I love the Dr. Seuss quote. And, one of the things we often get people asking us is, wasn't Montessori all about teaching children? And one of the things we like to say is she happened to teach children, but she could have applied her methodology and her thoughts and philosophy really to anyone. So Cameron, why don't we just jump right in and get going? And I'd like to start by when we think about, let me see if I can make this window smaller here. When we think about staff members, it may seem obvious, but just want to say at the outset that team member engagement is low. And so one of the things we need is really related to change that. So in order to change that, we need some creativity and some different ways of thinking. And I'd just like to preface this that pre-pandemic, team member engagement was low. So this is exacerbated by the pandemic, but it's not new. And I wanted to start off, and Cameron and I have worked at a place, actually I'm there right now in Los Angeles, but they've been really diligently working at Montessori. And they're trying to apply the same principles to residents as they do to staff. And when they apply these principles to staff, they come up with some different ideas, just as like when you apply those principles to residents, you come up with different ideas and different ways of thinking about engagement. But what you see on the screen is they have decided that they're really about growth and development, not managing and controlling and supervising. And so one of the ways they make that happen is they've gotten rid of their annual evaluations. And in place of that, they've gone to a model that doesn't look back retrospectively, but looks prospectively with each employee. And so it's really about, can someone in the organization sit down and actually see me and not rate me with a number, but actually see what I am and what I do and help me personally grow, just as we're helping residents find ways to engage and lead their most fulfilling life. Can we do that with staff as well?
Right, and one of the reasons that we've been working with Gary and with Monarch at the Center for Applied Research is that we had developed training for staff members to be able to engage persons with dementia using Montessori techniques. But what we would find is in an industry where you may have 100% turnover in a place within a year, you're building on sand. It's about being able to use these same principles, which we'll go into later, to use a system-wide approach, a system-wide philosophy, a system-wide set of principles, so that you're able to have a stable, cohesive workforce that is also shown respect and dignity, so that you're able then to be able to have a consistent care partner staff to deliver these trainings, these approaches to engage persons with dementia.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. And Cameron and I, our companies have sort of merged together. So we're approaching many places really related to how, if you have a community, whether it's residents or staff, and we'll talk about actually other communities as well, how to apply Montessori inspired principles so that you have a lifestyle, you have a different way of approaching life. What you see on the screen here is dream. So each person at this organization has written into their job description that they have an opportunity to daydream each week. And we can go into more why that would be, but one of the reasons they do that is because in order to innovate, they really discovered that innovation comes from when your mind often is at rest and an idea pops into your head. And so that's not just for senior team members or managers or directors. This is for every frontline staff, is that they have an opportunity each week to step back and actually take time to daydream and allow those ideas to kind of flourish and grab onto for the organization. When you come in as a new employee here, one of the things that they do is they surprise you at the end of the day, and the dining service makes a meal for your family that you can then take home and surprise your family with, hey, I just started this new job. And part of what happened is they gave me this meal for us all. So boy, it helps with families at home, where someone's going to a new job. But it also really helps with the dining folks who say like, yeah, we're proud of what we do. And we're anxious to surprise these folks with their meal to go home, and we're good at what we do. So consequently, the places that we're working with often right now, even in this COVID environment, don't have many dining positions open because they're applying these Montessori these principles to the folks that work in dining. This is an interesting one. What you see on the screen here is a business card. And one of Dr. Montessori's, I would say, values was respect, equality, and dignity. And it's interesting, if you think about in an organization, where are things inequitable? Well, one of the things that Roundtree discovered is one of those areas was in business cards. So who got a card and who didn't? And what does it mean to have a business card? And so they went through a kind of an introspection and exercise, and this is in the middle of the pandemic, and decided to give business cards to every single staff person. Now, they could also say they didn't want them because it's their choice, but almost all of them take a business card. And so it's the idea that each person's role is important. And it's not just lip service that's important. It's important enough that each of them get a business card. And so it's interesting what that does to a housekeeper when they get hired, that they get their own business card. Cameron, because of the time limit today, we have these principles that I have on the screen. For those of you who aren't familiar with Montessori, you see in the middle these values: respect, equality, and dignity. And then you see these principles that all surround and are really pathways that people can activate to get to the center values. And Cameron, maybe do you want to take just one or two of those principles and sort of flesh it out so the folks on the audience can get a little bit of a taste of how we use these?
Sure. So, for example, inviting a person to participate. We always tell staff members, for example, to try to eliminate the word can from your vocabulary when you interact with a person with dementia. Can is a test. Can you help me? Can you do this? We tell people, try to substitute the word would. Would you help me? Would is a choice between equals. Would makes it a level playing field. Would is a way of empowering the resident. And so just that little change changes the nature of the relationship, looking at demonstrating more and talking less. So especially if a person has more advanced dementia, you may have to be able to demonstrate, for example, how to brush your teeth, but you'll bring in your toothbrush and your toothpaste. You'll do it step by step. So break a task down into steps. You would take off the end of your toothpaste tube, invite them to do it. Put some on a toothbrush, invite them to do it. And when you demonstrate like that, a person, even if they can't verbalize, often is able to imitate. And so with practice, they get better at doing it. They get more confident at doing it. And being able to give people back capacity for self-care, for being able to shave themselves, to be able to brush their own teeth. These are little things that are big things. This is how people regain the capacity to do things, which you're not supposed to be able to do. If you have dementia, you can do it. All right. So those are just a very few examples, but the key is that when we use these principles, when we give choice, like, would you like to wear this or this today, as opposed to what do you want to wear? When you give choice that is in the wheelhouse, that is within the capacity of a person with dementia. Remember the quote from Maya Angelou, I will forget what you say, I'll forget what you do, I'll never forget how you make me feel. And so this is very true of persons with dementia. So to be able to have this good relationship with persons with dementia, to be the person who does offer choice, to enable them to feel more confident in their own capacities, these are very big things. This is what enables a person to feel like they're at a home as opposed to a place where you don't have choice.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron. And as you're looking at the screen, these are not things that are linear, that you go from the left all the way to the right, but there are things that if you can activate as many of them as possible in each interaction that you have with someone, it's amazing how that influences the results. So Dr. Montessori did that with small children. So if you get a chance to go to a Montessori school, you'll see children working independently, but what you won't see is a lot of acting out. You won't see a lot of fighting or people yelling or screaming at each other. What you'll see is kids learning, right? And so when you activate these principles with a person with dementia, instead of seeing apathy or responsive behaviors, you'll see them engage. And what I just like to say is, as you're looking at the screen, we apply these same principles to staff. Because again, staff are just human beings. They may be just a little bit younger than an older adult and a little bit older than someone that's in school, but they're all human beings. So these are kind of universal principles that hold the key, I would say really the key to having behavior happen in a different way. And we're going to talk about that here coming up. What you see on the screen, equality, dignity, and respect is really about trust. And when you have those things and you don't let those go and they're not optional. So it's not optional for us to treat each other in a way that's not dignified or respectful. We often hear from staff persons that, oh, I wish I would get talked to the way these other staff talk with nurses, or I'm sorry, that the nurses talk with residents. They talk with residents in a certain way, but then when it comes to talking to me, it feels less respectful. So what we're saying is that these things really apply to all of us because we're individuals and we're human beings. I'm not going to spend much time at all on this slide, but we are also working with Westinghouse, have in the past Columbia, South Carolina, and their nuclear enrichment plant. Electron Energy is a manufacturer of magnets, third largest in the world. There's a power team service company in the South that does high tension power. Canon USA is an Italian company that manufactures car parts. They're all looking at Montessori as a way to improve staff engagement. So this is not just limited to long-term care. And Cameron, I'll let you talk about this screen and the next one, this is the reach that we currently have?
Yes, so we're doing work around the world. We have training partners in a number of continents. We I was recently in Paris in December, right ahead of the Omicron wave, doing 3 days of training there. And Gary was able to Zoom in and do a full day seminar on Montessori for leadership as well. And so the point is that these are universal principles in the truest sense of the word, that they span cultures. The principles are translated, or the practices are translated to fit within the culture of the individual. It has to be person-centered, which is embedded within a culture. But I'll just give you a quick example from a book that we have, Hiding the Stranger in the Mirror. In Darwin, in the Northern Territories of Australia, an Aboriginal woman developed dementia, was taken to a nursing home, and when she was brought in to shower first day, she had an extreme anxiety attack. She was anxious, hitting people. And so the nurse who was in charge of that neighborhood went to the woman's village and then came back. And the next day, instead of taking her into a shower, she brought her out to a rock outside, gave her a garden hose, put up some screens, and the lady washed herself. Now, that was the way the people in her village would wash themselves. Imagine being taken from that situation and brought into a cave shower, and suddenly hot water squirts out from the cave and people are holding you down to have the water on you. Why wouldn't you be absolutely combative and wondering what the heck's going on? And add to that you have dementia. So it's about translating these principles into the culture of the individual so that it can be truly person-centered, but it can be done and it's being done. So yes.
Great, Cameron, thanks. And good, you want to take this one, Cameron, too?
Again, we have a pretty wide reach. We have clients around the United States. I'll just give you a quick example. In Florida, where we're working with the Goodman Group, their memory care neighborhood before COVID hit had a social concerns committee every quarter. And so these people in memory care one quarter led a hunger drive. So they were gathering food. For their outing, they took it to a church where they were collecting food. One quarter, they created toiletry bags, collections of toiletry items, and brought them to a homeless shelter. And it was interesting. The staff, when they got there, were kind of hesitant, and the residents just barreled on in, gave people the toiletry bags, and told them, we're praying for you. Things are going to get better. Actually, that program won an award from the Pioneer Network. And so these are examples of some of the things that are going on in Oregon. There is a beer making club at one of the communities for frontier management. And what was interesting was that they started winning awards. And then every month after that, again, pre-COVID, a local beer making group in the community would meet there in the memory care neighborhood. The people with tattoos and piercings would talk with the people with dementia about Cascade hops versus Old World hops. And collectively, they came up with a formula that was brewed by a local microbrewery. They sold it in kegs and raised $10,000 for the Alzheimer's Walk. So these are examples of things that start to happen when you begin to form communities based on trust that is generated by the application of these principles.
Great, Cameron, thank you. So I'm going to tell you two stories that they really illustrate, I think, what Montessori is all about. And before telling you this, I want to remind you that Dr. Montessori taught children that were thought to be unteachable. And how did she do that? She used those principles that we just talked about, but part of what she did was she believed a teacher is best when they're the teacher is doing their job best when they're not seen. They also don't talk a lot. They demonstrate more than they talk. And it was really a teacher's role to be an observer. So they didn't try to convince people or persuade people or talk people into stuff. And I think, that's true, particularly for the group on this webinar. Activities, and at least in our minds, is not about entertainment. It's really, but Dr. Montessori thought an activity is everything that you do, right? So everything that you do from when you get up to when you go to sleep is an activity. So what you see on the screen is 2 buckets of popcorn. So there was an interesting experiment that happened in the year 2000. Some folks showed up to a movie theater in Chicago to catch a movie. They were given a free soft drink and a bucket of popcorn. One bucket was, you might have gotten a large bucket, or you might have gotten sort of a smaller or medium-sized buckets. The only thing you had to do is come back at the end of this, after the movie, and say what your opinion was of the concession stand. But what they did is they really, prior to giving the popcorn out, they engineered the popcorn to be just wretched, to be unedible. It was popped earlier, it was stale, it squeaked, it was soggy. And so they gave folks buckets of popcorn that most people wouldn't eat. The only difference was one's large and one was small. And what they found was pretty interesting, is that the people with the large buckets ate more popcorn, rather than the folks with the smaller buckets. So, a large bucket of popcorn, someone would eat 21 more hand dips into popcorn that was not edible. And so one of the things we learned from that is people eat more when you give them a bigger container, period. Now, what's fascinating about this, and what's really instructive for us, really related to working with residents and with staff, is an easy change problem. So if you really wanted people to eat less popcorn, give them a smaller bucket. We can turn into a hard change problem by trying to convince people to think differently. I would just suggest that, particularly in this environment right now with staff, what looks like a people problem is more often a situation problem. And so remember, prior to the pandemic, engagement ratings across the United States were at 30%. So 70% of all staff are disengaged in the United States. And so what is really interesting, to change someone's behavior, you've got to change that person's situation and their hearts and minds. So Dr. Montessori, when she started her school, she didn't start a school that looked just like any other public school. She said, hey, I think these kids could be taught, but I think we need to change the environment, and then the kids will behave differently. Dr. Camp has done just great, really elegant work with residents, saying that I think a person with dementia can continue to learn. We just need to change the environment and they will come back to life. And what we're saying with staff is, if we shift the environment that they're in, they'll behave differently and they'll become more engaged by applying these Montessori principles, which has been, for Cameron and I, has been just really totally fascinating how this worked out. So you can apply that. Go ahead, Cameron, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I love it when staff members say, let me tell you what my residents were able to do today without me. Earlier, Charles said a Montessori quote, everything you do for me, you take from me. And so this is about changing that mindset, that environment. And when that happens, the nature of the job changes and becomes more engaging. The idea is that you take joy in the success of the resident and of other staff members in terms of what they're able to accomplish. It's not only about you, it's not on you. You're not totally responsible for doing everything for people. And so it's about shifting a mindset, shifting an environment so that it's more engaging for both residents and staff.
So, and Cameron, in a very similar fashion, when someone will say, hey, let me tell you what a resident did without me, that's very true for like a director of nursing about staff, is let me tell you what the staff did without me being involved. I was at a place in Sarasota, Florida recently where they're really being diligent about applying these Montessori principles. And so they're taking a principle, one principle a month, and they're having the staff tell stories about how they've applied that principle to a resident and to a fellow staff member. So they started doing this, and one of the things they discovered is it would be more powerful if they went around and had somebody interview the staff and capture their stories on video. So them telling the story about how they're applying those principles. And so the director of nursing, the nursing home administrator, the staff developer, those folks weren't the ones that came up with that system. It was a number of housekeepers that did, and just said like, hey, if we really want this to stick, this is what we would do. So,
I was in a place in New York, actually, Arch Care, last week. And on one of their memory care neighborhoods, they have a large number of people, a variety of levels of cognitive impairment, limited amount of space, a limited amount of time to be able to provide meals. And so the executive director came in and started asking staff, what can we do to improve this situation? What are your thoughts? And the nurse assistant said, can we provide the meals in shifts? Can we bring in the people who have the least amount of impairment, the ones who are most independent, bring them in first, and then have them in a separate section. And when they're finished, they can be engaged in an activity, while the rest of the residents then can be brought in, and we can provide more one-on-one care with them, since we know that the first shift of residents has been fed. And I said to the executive director afterwards, that was great, because you were asking for their solution and empowering the staff. And when they see that actually like implemented, then they'll be ready to come up with more ideas, because the people who are like in the trenches are often the ones who are most likely to come up with a good solution. And also, if it's theirs, they're much more likely to want to implement it than if it's brought in from on high.
excellent. Thanks, Cameron. Just another real quick story, not going to spend much time on this, but there's a great story about Keith Jarrett, who's a jazz pianist, American jazz pianist. He was brought over to Germany to play a concert in Cologne. And when he got there, this is what he found. Oops, let me go back. He found what you see there on the screen. He found an old dilapidated piano, and Keith Jarrett's a real fussy sort of pianist. He was looking to have a grand piano. So he went to leave. He said, I'm not playing. And the person that brought him over just really begged him to stay. And he said, well, I'll stay, but I'm going to record this so you can see what happens when you don't give me what I need. And so he played the piano in this concert, and lo and behold, faced with a dilapidated piano and suffering from backaches and sleep withdrawal, he defied odds and he recorded his masterpiece, the Cologne concert. And why I say that is because right now in this environment, we're faced with dilapidated pianos at work. We're faced with, against all odds, trying to pull something off. And what's interesting is using that story and using that with staff and saying like, yeah, maybe now is the time for us to create our masterpiece. Maybe from the situation that we're in, we can really rise up and create something that we would have never had the opportunity to create. And so this story is pretty instructive to saying to this, and playing the concert actually is pretty interesting to play that for frontline staff and say like, well, given the piano that we have in front of us, what kind of music can we create together? And to date, it's still the best-selling piano album of all time, which is kind of amazing. Just real quickly, there's a difference between staff satisfaction and staff engagement. I like to think of it as, on a Friday night, there's a number of restaurants that you may enjoy going to, but there'll only be one or two that you love. And so for many years, we've had a low bar for staff engagement. We have thought of it as satisfied employees as opposed to engaged employees. And there's a difference with how they function. So an engaged person is really 100% psychologically committed to the job. They're more productive, they're more efficient. We can really demonstrate they're 71% safer. And they're always looking for new and better ways to achieve their jobs. Across the country, this is what it looks like. It's pretty bleak. And in Europe, it's much worse. But there's only 30% of people actively engaged pre-pandemic. It's gotten a little bit worse since the pandemic, not terribly, it's gone down a few points. But if you think about it, in your organization, you're having people come in really with 70% with one arm tied behind their back. However, we applied these Montessori principles out here at Roundtree, and it jumped to 60% of folks engaged. And if you look at the amount of people that were actively disengaged, now that would be people who've quit but still work for you. That really shrunk down to 4%. So they weren't actively, there were very few people actively working against the company. So 22% of employees, agree the leadership in the organization has a clear direction. 15% think the organizations, they're enthusiastic about the future. And communication really scores low in almost every organization. When you apply these Montessori principles, it's just shocking how staff will say communication has greatly improved. And part of what we do when we interact is to help people realize that there's oftentimes not one truth. So if you look at a 9 between these two characters on the screen, one person's going to see a 9 and one person's going to see a 6. It's really it's an interesting conflict management with staff, that it may be a 9 to one person and a 6 to another, right? And so we have to understand that different people see things in different ways. Cameron has written a book, and you might want to talk about it just a wee bit, Cameron, about empathy and conflict resolutions amongst residents with dementia.
Right. My wife, Montessori teacher for more than 20 years, was attending some of our trainings in Europe. And she came to me and said, if you're successful and you don't have residents with dementia sitting in chairs along the walls with their chin on their chest, if you actually have people who now are active and interacting and expressing themselves and living more independently, you may see an increase in conflict, because you'll see people expressing opinions and not necessarily agreeing with each other. You need to prepare for success. You need to be able to give people the tools they need to teach persons with dementia how to resolve conflicts, how to have empathy for one another. And so that was the basis of our book, Teaching Empathy and Conflict Resolution to People with Dementia. And so that was published by the same British publishing company that publishes a lot of work by Christine Bryden and Kate Swaffer. And what's interesting, of course, is that if you can teach these things to persons with dementia, you can also use the same techniques for persons without dementia, because, as we've said, it's a human thing. So, how do you enable people to resolve conflicts respectfully? And, part of it is learning that sometimes what you see as a truth is just the same thing viewed from a different perspective. And that it isn't necessarily that you're right and they're wrong, they're bad because they don't agree with you. It's about learning to accept differences of perspective, which is an incredibly useful human tool to acquire. And so it's about getting ready to have fully active living human beings who are residents and also who are staff members. It's about creating community among diverse individuals, community among residents where they're empowered, and community among staff. Gary mentioned increases in safety, and that's what happens when staff members trust one another, when staff members communicate with each other, when staff members help each other, We had 15 inches of snow yesterday. I was out in my driveway and on the sidewalks with two of my neighbors. We were helping each other clear our drivewalks and our sidewalks with our snow blowers, and because we're part of a community. And so being able to trust, being able to say, hey, if you need help, just ask, I'm here for you. And not living within the silo of your job and your department. That's not my department. That's not my job description. Being able to create community is everything.
Yeah, and one of the things Dr. Montessori did is she taught in a non-traditional fashion. So she taught by demonstration. So let me give you two quick examples of that as that relates to staff. So we do a little exercise with staff. Usually, if I can, I usually bring a guitarist with me, but if not, we'll use music. And we'll play 3 songs for people, 3 snippets of songs, pair them up and ask them to tell each other which was their favorite song and why. And so people will say, oh, my favorite song was number 2, and this is why. And then we'll have them share that with each other, with the larger group. And we've done this even in the pandemic. We've done this through Zoom. It actually works pretty well. And then we say, well, does it ever occur to you to tell your partner that they picked the wrong song? And they'll say, well, no, because that's their song. That's the song they picked. That's from their history. That's from their past. And then we say, well, that's pretty similar when you're at work and you have a difference of opinion. People are hearing different music in their head. They're hearing different music from how they grew up. They're hearing different music because they have different preferences. It's not personal to you. And so that gives staff a way to hang on to something when they do have a conflict. I'll then often hear them say, oh, you're hearing different music. It gives them a different, a way to kind of detach a little bit from the sort of the inflammatory things that can happen when people get in conflict. Another exercise we did is we had, as many places have, they have a kitchen. And so we had a group of 26 housekeepers make a pizza. And so there's 4 pizzas and they had toppings. And all they had to do was put whatever toppings that they wanted in their group on a pizza. And what they needed to do then is each of them at least eat 1 piece of whatever it is that they created. So they went ahead and made these pizzas. And I noticed one group, after the pizzas came back that the chef cooked them, the one group, the 2 ladies weren't eating any of the slices. And I asked them why. And they said, oh, we're vegetarians. And I said, oh, well, let's talk to the folks in your group. If they would have known you're vegetarians, I'm sure they would have split the pizza in half. And they said to me, yeah, no, I don't think they would. And so I asked the other folks and they said, yeah, no, we wouldn't do that. we wanted meat on our pizza. And then the one lady looked at me and she said, that's what it's like to work here. This is an example of what it's like to work here. And I said, well, are there other examples like that? And she said, yeah, when I come in the morning, all the best mops are gone. And so that's a different way of getting with them about dignity, respect, and equality. So she wasn't feeling any of those. But to talk with her about that concept, I don't think we would have gotten as far as to demonstrate it. And so she could really feel it and then sort of say like, oh yeah, now I know what you're talking about. And that also kind of cuts across language barriers, because in that location, I think they had about 12 different languages for staff. But one of the reasons why all this is important is the United States and across the world, really, they're shifting sentiments. And this is pre-COVID, but it's no different with COVID. When you talk with folks about patriotism, as an example, 55 and older, people say it's very important to them. But when you look at it by an age difference, when you're 18 to 38, it drops down by almost half. And then the next thing is, when you look at police officers, religious leaders, elected officials, and what many of probably on this webinar are business leaders, the 18 to 29-year-olds, 34% have a great deal of confidence in business leaders. It's not, if you're over 50, that raises up to almost 50%. Elected officials never were very high. But what that means is that new employees coming in have grown up in a time where institutions have not have not done well by them, that they have failed them. Nobody gets a job for life anymore, like my dad did or my grandfather did. The good thing about younger employees is they're more embracing of community and tolerance, and they think and care a lot about minorities and victims of economic injustice. Now, I'm going to tie that into Montessori here. If you think about, you have a senior team, a board, mission, values, efficiency, control, and then you have shift work, attendance, policies, labor, and I say hiding because most employees have two jobs. One is to do their job, and the other is to hide. They're to hide their failures. That's part of what they try to do, is not let you know when they're not succeeding. But that's a positional authority. It's really vertical, but society has changed now to it's horizontal for many employees. It doesn't work to try to get them to connect or stick with your mission statement or supervisor or leader. That's not where, that's kind of not where they're living anymore. They're really living with the most important relationship are with peers, personal life, fulfillment, and causes. So I just want to point out, and be interesting, Cameron, for you to comment. You know, when we would approach a memory care unit with persons with dementia prior to Montessori, it would all be about what groups did the person attend? How much, what can we entertain? And we got to keep them busy. What can we do to persuade them to come out of their room? And medication for symptoms and behaviors. That's kind of the vertical kind of positional authority. We're the staff and you're the resident. When you shift that around, so the staff are doing a good job when they're not seen, and the residents are forming their own committees, their own community, even with significant disability with dementia, amazing things happen, right? And it's the same with staff. It's the same thing when we shift that with staff. Your thoughts there, Cameron?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a community, I always say, if this is a community, like, where's the welcome wagon? How do residents greet new members of the community? What do they choose as their custom, as their approach? When someone dies, how do they commemorate that death? What rituals will this community choose? In Neuchâtel, Switzerland, they create a memory garden. And when someone would pass away, they would put this rock in what looked like a Zen garden. They would have the date and the name of the person who passed away. And then they would have a ceremony that the residents created. The family members would come, the rock would be placed. A group of people in Montpellier in the south of France were told about this, and they said, no, we don't want to do that. When someone passes away, we want to write a letter of condolence to the family. And that was their ritual. And so it's about, once again, empowering. It's about creating community. It's about enabling people to make it their community with their choice. I remember we were asked to help with a memory care community in Naples, Florida. They were about to open with 60 rooms in a highly competitive market. And a week or so before they were going to open, there were several rooms in the community that hadn't been named yet. And we were asked, what shall we name the rooms? And we said, don't. Put up signs which say, rooms will be named by residents. Come back in 6 months to see what they've chosen. And they did. One room the residents chose as the remembrance room, and it was where they remembered everyone who had served in the armed forces. And the idea is that I might not have thought of that, and that's the point. It's their community, and so being able to have causes, as we talked about before, with the residents who help with homeless shelters and with food drive. What do the residents want? I have to tell you, you don't know, and until you ask, you won't find out. And sometimes residents don't know until they start thinking about it. And so this is like a voyage of discovery. This is like life, where, Montessori said that the child will lead us. Well, the resident should be leading us, and the staff member should be leading us in terms of how to move forward, how to evolve.
So I'm just going to talk for a minute. Our time's kind of coming short here, Cameron. When you look at this screen here, I want you to imagine, if you think about in your place of work, how huddles work, whether it's in the activities department or whether it's life enrichment, whether it's skilled nursing, whether in any kind of thing. And I could talk about hospitals and manufacturing plants as well. And typically those huddles that happen, I would say 95 to 98% of the information that goes on there is about residents, right? It's not about the people that are in the huddle. It's not about how they're building themselves as a team. It's not about what sort of personal ways can those people connect more together. So imagine a huddle that still covers in 5 to 7 minutes. And this is what we teach, a Montessori huddle. Montessori huddle still covers what it needs to cover for resident care or for the work of the day, I would say, for the next 8 hours. But what it also does, it has all kinds of roles for people that are in the huddles to attend to each other. So for instance, one typical role that you would have in a huddle that's a Montessori huddle would be at the end, one of the staff members the day before would have volunteered to bring an inspirational thought. That doesn't have to come from the leader, that can come from within the group. Another a person in the huddle would open the huddle with a warm-up. And the warm-up could be as fun thing as, what was your first car you ever owned? Just something where people can get to know each other. Another person can have the role of saying, like, I'm the person that's going to keep us on time today. So that's my role that I'm going to play. So there's all these different roles that you can play within the structures that you have, and you apply Montessori principles to them. So we do that with accountability and discipline. We do that with communication, and we do that with coaching. And Cameron does very similar things with residents, apply Montessori principles, and all of a sudden residents are running committees. Residents are actually doing things related to dining and food and housekeeping. And I'm at it where I am right now. There was a resident who was having trouble going to sleep at night or waking up in the morning. She was a little bit agitated, and they realized that all through her life, she was a receptionist. And so for the last 2 years, I think she's been answering the phones here. And she's just done a complete turnaround. So she found her meaning, she found her purpose and her activity. And that's also true for staff, is for us to connect them with peers, to have them find a way that they can complete their cause, their reason that they're here on earth, that they're fulfilled beyond the task that they're currently being paid to do. And so that they can sort of bring their best version of themselves to work, is really what Montessori's genius was. Charles, I know you were probably about 7 minutes of, I didn't know if we wanted to pause here. Cameron and I can also sort of, keep going till the top of the hour, but if you have any questions, or Megan, I can't see the.
Yeah, I saw a question that was very good, and that was, how can you apply these things during COVID, and also something kind of related to that in terms of staff being worn out. So a couple of things. First, we've actually done entire webinars on engaging residents and staff during COVID. So, circle back with us if you can. But let me just give you one example that sort of touches on both of these points. So one of the things that I suggested in my meeting in New York last week was that you create among residents an entertainment committee, and that as an activity, you gather as a group in front of a large screen and you view videos of performances of local artists. And then you have the residents put together an invitation letter to that artist, asking if they'd be willing to donate a half an hour or an hour of their time doing a webinar, a Zoom webinar of entertainment for the residents of this neighborhood. And the letter is signed by the residents, members of the entertainment committee. And an invitation coming from residents is much more powerful than anything a staff member can do. And that's true whether it's coming to an activity on the floor or an invitation to a local artist. And then, of course, you have something to look forward to. And it's all about being able to look forward to the future, to be able to have some hope and infusing that into the system. And then, of course, if you have the performance, the thank you letters, and then a statement saying, those who donate 5 hours or more a year become an artist in residence here and on our wall of fame. But also then the confidence that residents have and the satisfaction, the pride of being able to accomplish something like this. And then they begin to ask, what else could we do? And so that's like just one example. It's about giving people the chance to do something like appreciative inquiry, which is another one of our tools. So I was with a group in Florida last week and said a question I got from Gary, when we are tired, what gives us energy at work? When we are exhausted, what are the things that pump life back into us? And then how can we have more of that? And so once again, circling back to a person's own experiences, either on that job or at other jobs, when we are at our best, what are we like? When we're communicating well, what are we doing? And so many times the answers are there for the taking, but if you just talk about the problem, you just go into a downward spiral and everyone can commiserate, but it doesn't solve anything. And it can increase a sense of hopelessness. So again, these are actually things that you can also do with residents. These are human things. And then finally, one little thing in COVID, we had staff who said, what we began to do was to interview residents in our memory care neighborhood. What did you do to get through tough times? I mean, you went through wars, you went through depression, you've gone through so many things in your personal lives. What did you do to get through? And so there's this resource there. Old people are incredibly cool. And I think people with dementia are amazingly cool. And so being able to start to think of them as a resource is another way to help us get through.
Thank you so much, Cameron. Gary, if you wouldn't mind unsharing your screen, I'd love to follow up on some of these comments with a resource that we developed for today. But both of you, Gary and Cameron, I'd like to really thank you for today's presentation. Cameron, like you said, I'm sure I think you have one of these stickers that say those people are cool somewhere. Yeah. This obviously resonates on many levels for many of us online, and you probably saw the comments. I think it's safe to say that many of us are quote unquote burned out through this pandemic, through the additional staffing crisis. So, these very refreshing ideas of tying things that are relatively easy to implement, shifting the perspective is important. One of the things that you mentioned, which I really loved, is when you mentioned the fact that Maria Montessori said that the children should lead us, and obviously in our industry, in our profession, residents should lead us, right? Yes. And I, in so many aspects, love that reminder, not only because that is how you preserve and celebrate the person, that is how you drive community, but I would argue that's kind of the reasons why a lot of us show up at work, right? We're here to collaborate with the elders. So thank you very much for all these brilliant reminders. There's been many questions about your books, the presentations, and all of that. So anyone on the line, I want to just, as a reminder, share with you that both Gary and Cameron were agreed to collaborate with us on a very, kind of a tip sheet that you can all download now. Megan, if you don't mind sharing the link here. The other thing that we're excited to remind the audience about is the fact that Dr. Cameron Camp is part of our Resident Engagement Institute, which is something exclusive for Link Senior clients, which is all about continuing to elevate the experience for our elders and the experience for our team members. So Cameron and Gary, as a close here, I'd love to again thank you, invite all of the audience to continue the conversation further, both on the social media platform that we've enabled, and by email. Both Cameron and Gary have agreed to respond to your questions and follow up by email. So here are the emails. And again, thank you so much for not only kind of this really cool reminder, but helping us continuing to do what we love to do, which is to celebrate people. Gary and Cameron, thank you so much for this.
It's a genuine pleasure.
Absolutely. All of you, as a quick reminder, Activity Strong, we've continued to design other education opportunities for you. It's every 2 weeks, as a reminder. All of these can be found on our activitystrong.com website. And if you haven't seen, we're celebrating 40 years of innovation, empathy, and defining dementia care by supporting the Validation Training Institute, their first World Congress on February 15th. So please join us. It's going to be a half-day event full of amazing speaking opportunities educational opportunities. Again, thanks all for joining. Gary, Cameron, amazing presentation. I look forward to connecting with you in the future. In the meantime, Gary, enjoy your time in the sun. I think you have sun today in California. And Cameron, good luck with continuing to shovel the snow in Ohio. Take care, everyone. Enjoy the end of the day.